In the months before his fall, Terry de la Mesa Allen moved through the American army like a man already at war with more than just the enemy. He was loud where others were reserved, profane where others were polished, and relentless where caution had become habit. Among his soldiers, he was feared and adored in equal measure, a commander who walked the front lines at night, who demanded movement when exhaustion begged for stillness, who believed darkness belonged to the bold. By the summer of 1943, as American forces pushed deeper into the Mediterranean theater, Allen's reputation had spread well beyond his own division. German prisoners spoke of American patrols that appeared after midnight, of sudden assault launched without warning, of an enemy commander who refused to let the battlefield sleep. Within the U.S. Army, he was whispered about as a night fighter of uncommon aggression, a general who treated war as a continuous hunt, rather than a sequence of scheduled engagements. To some, he represented the kind of leadership needed to break a hardened Axis defense. To others, especially those tasked with shaping a professional, disciplined force for a long war, he was a liability waiting to erupt. The context in which Allen rose was unforgiving. The U.S. Army that entered World War II was vast in manpower but uneven in experience. Senior commanders were under pressure to prove that American forces could match seasoned European armies not just in firepower but in control. Discipline, coordination, and predictability were prized as much as courage. Terry Allen, commanding the 1st Infantry Division, embodied a different philosophy. He believed discipline was earned in combat, not imposed by regulation. He tolerated unshaven faces, muddy uniforms, and an informality that unsettled visiting officers. His headquarters was often closer to the front than doctrine advised, and his manner with subordinates blurred the line between command and camaraderie. In North Africa, and later in Sicily, his division fought hard and advanced relentlessly, but it did so at a cost. Casualties mounted. Equipment was sometimes left scattered, and report reached higher headquarters describing chaos, where Allen saw initiative. These reports landed on the desk of Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, a man whose temperament could not have been more different. Bradley was quiet, methodical, and deeply concerned with the long-term health of the army he was helping to build. He valued steadiness over spectacle and believed that battles should be won through coordination rather than impulse. Where Allen thrived in the friction of close combat, Bradley preferred clarity and order. Their paths crossed repeatedly as American operations expanded, and each encounter reinforced their mutual distrust. Bradley saw in Allen a commander who burned through men as if replacement were endless, who risked operational control for short-term gains. Allen, for his part, regarded Bradley as overly cautious, a general more concerned with paperwork than pressure. The tension between them remained mostly unspoken, but it was present in every after-action report, every staff meeting, every whispered assessment passed along the chain of command. The breaking point came in Sicily, where the American invasion tested not just tactics but temperament. The island's rugged terrain and stubborn German resistance turned advances into grinding affairs. Allen drove his division forward with the same ferocity he had shown before, ordering night movements that kept the enemy off balance but exhausted his own troops. Roads clogged with traffic, supply lines frayed, and rear area discipline deteriorated. Soldiers slept where they fell, weapons went uncleaned, and stragglers drifted behind the lines. To Allen, these were the inevitable scars of hard fighting. To Bradley, they were signs of a division slipping out of control. Reports from staff officers painted a picture of brilliance at the point of contact and disorder everywhere else. Bradley listened, watched, and waited, aware that relieving a successful combat commander carried risks of its own. The progression toward Allen's removal was not sudden but cumulative, built from small observations and mounting unease. Bradley visited the front and saw the men of the 1st Infantry Division move with confidence, but he also saw what he interpreted as a lack of cohesion. He heard Allen speak with blunt disdain for regulations and sensed a commander who trusted instinct over system. In private, Bradley worried about what would happen when such a leader was placed in an even larger, more complex operation. The war was expanding, and future invasions would demand synchronization on a scale Allen had never managed. The question was not whether Allen could fight, but whether he could fit into the structure Bradley believed was necessary to win. The climax came not with a single catastrophic failure but with a decision made in the quiet of command offices, far from gunfire. Bradley concluded that Allen's strengths were inseparable from his weaknesses, and that the very trait that made him effective in short, brutal engagements threatened the discipline of the army as a whole. When the order came relieving Terry Allen of his command, it struck like a thunderclap through the division. Soldiers who had followed him through darkness and blood were stunned. Many felt betrayed, convinced that their general was being punished for fighting too hard, for refusing to soften the edge that had kept them alive. Allen himself received the news with a mixture of anger and grim understanding. He did not beg or protest publicly. He knew Bradley's mind had been made up long before the final word was spoken. The resolution was as stark as the decision itself. Terry Allen left the division he had forged in combat, his reputation intact among the men who had served under him, but tarnished within the higher echelons of command. Bradley, for his part, absorbed the criticism that followed, aware that he had removed a proven fighter at a time when victories were desperately needed. The army moved on, more orderly, more controlled, but undeniably changed by the absence of a commander who had treated night as an ally and war as a personal contest of will. The episode left behind no clear victor, only the lingering question of how much ferocity an army could afford to harness, and how much it feared the cost of unleashing it. Allen did not disappear from the war when he was relieved. He was merely displaced, set aside in a system that rarely discarded men outright. Yet the manner of his removal lingered, not only with him, but within the officer corps that watched it unfold. Word traveled quickly through command channels that one of the Army's most aggressive division commanders had been fired not for defeat, but for excess. For officers who believed combat leadership was measured by ground taken and enemies broken, the message was unsettling. For Bradley, it was a necessary assertion of authority, an act meant to reinforce the kind of army he believed the United States had to become if it were to fight across continents and through years of war. But even as Allen stepped away from the limelight, the consequence of the decision continued to ripple outward, shaping perception and planting quiet resentments. Among the soldiers of the 1st Infantry Division, the reaction was visceral. Men who had watched Allen stride through shellfire, who had heard his voice cutting through the darkness during night movements, felt as though something essential had been taken from them. Many had joined the division green and uncertain, and had learned to fight under a commander who demanded aggression and rewarded initiative. Allen had been visible in a way few generals were, a presence that made the abstract authority of rank feel personal and immediate. His removal created a void not easily filled by a successor who, no matter how competent, could not replicate the bond forged in shared danger. Morale did not collapse, but it shifted, hardening into a quieter, more resigned acceptance of the army as an institution rather than a brotherhood led by a singular figure. Bradley understood this cost, even if he did not publicly acknowledge it. He was not blind to Allen's popularity, nor to the effectiveness his division had demonstrated in combat. But Bradley's concerns extended beyond the present battlefields. He was already thinking ahead to future operations, to landings that would require precise timing, massive logistical coordination, and strict adherence to plans developed far from the FR. In that vision, there was little room for a commander who improvised freely and treated doctrine as a suggestion. Bradley feared that Allen's style, successful in the Mediterranean, could prove disastrous in a larger, more tightly orchestrated campaign. The decision to remove him was, in Bradley's mind, an act of prevention as much as correction. Yet the progression of events revealed an irony that would not be lost on those who observed the war closely. As American forces prepared for even greater undertakings, the need for commander who could inspire men under extreme stress became increasingly apparent. The very traits that had marked Allen as problematic, his willingness to push men beyond perceived limits, his comfort operating in chaos, his instinctive grasp of battlefield psychology were traits the army struggled to cultivate elsewhere. Allen's absence was felt not only by his former division but by an institution that found itself searching for leaders who could combine discipline with ferocity, control with courage. In sidelining him, the army had reaffirmed its values, but it had also narrowed its range of acceptable command styles. Allen himself was left to reckon with the outcome in private. Removed from direct command, he wrestled with a bitterness that never fully faded. He believed, with some justification, that he had been punished for winning the wrong way, for embracing a form of warfare that was messy, exhausting, and brutally effective. He did not deny that his division had been rough around the edges, but he questioned whether Polish was the measure by which a combat unit should be judged. In conversations with those who knew him, he spoke less of Bradley personally and more of an army that, in his view, risked becoming too cautious, too constrained by its own rules to fully exploit the enemy's weaknesses. The climax of this episode, though quieter than a battlefield confrontation, lay in the broader realization of what the decision represented. Bradley's action signaled that the American army would prioritize cohesion and predictability over individual brilliance, that it would subordinate the instincts of its most aggressive commanders to the demands of centralized control. This was not an impulsive choice, but a deliberate shaping of institutional culture. Allen's firing became a reference point, cited in staff discussions and officer evaluations as an example of how far initiative could go before it crossed into insubordination or disorder. It was a warning as much as a judgment, a line drawn by a commander determined to impose his vision of professionalism on a force still defining itself. The resolution was as stark as the decision itself. Allen remained in uniform, his career bruised but not ended, while Bradley continued upward, entrusted with ever greater responsibilities. The war pressed on, indifferent to personal grievances, yet shaped by the decisions of men like these. The episode left behind a subtle enduring legacy, an understanding that victory alone was not enough, that how a battle was fought mattered almost as much as its outcome. In the tension between Allen's relentless night fighting and Bradley's insistence on order, the American army revealed its struggle to balance aggression with control, a struggle that would define its conduct for the rest of the war. Time did not soften the edge of the decision, but it did give it context. As months passed and new commanders took the field, the contrast between Terry Allen's absence and the evolving character of American operations became more pronounced. The army grew larger, more methodical, its movements increasingly governed by schedules, phase lines, and supply tables that stretched back to ports and factories half a world away. The chaos that Allen had embraced as an unavoidable feature of combat was steadily pushed to the margins, treated as a problem to be managed rather than a condition to be exploited. For Bradley, this was progress. For those who had served under Allen, it often felt like a loss of intimacy with the war itself. Yet, the battlefield had a way of challenging even the most carefully constructed systems. As American forces encountered stiff resistance and unexpected setbacks, whispers resurfaced about commanders who had once thrived in uncertainty. Officers remembered Allen's willingness to move at night, to strike when the enemy assumed Americans would pause. They recalled his belief that fatigue could be weaponized, that relentless pressure could erode defenses faster than any single blow. These recollections did not lead to a reversal of Bradley's philosophy, but they complicated it, reminding the army that doctrine alone could not account for the human element of combat. War was not merely a problem of logistics and planning. It was a contest of endurance, fear, and will, areas where Allen had excelled. Allen's own journey through this period was marked by frustration and reflection. Assigned to roles that kept him away from the front, he watched the war unfold from a distance he had never sought. Reports crossed his desk, detailing operations that, to his mind, moved too slowly or hesitated at critical moments. He remained convinced that opportunities were being missed, that the enemy was being granted time to recover. At the same time, he could not ignore the reality that large-scale operations demanded a level of coordination he had rarely prioritized. The army was fighting a different kind of war now, one that spanned continents and required the synchronization of millions of men. Allen's style, forged in the immediacy of close combat, sat uneasily within that vast machinery. The progression of events eventually led to a subtle re-evaluation of Allen himself. Though he had been removed from his division, he was not forgotten. Senior leaders recognized that his aggressive instincts still had value, particularly in situations where momentum mattered more than execution. When Allen was later given another command, it was in recognition that the army could not afford to discard experience, even when it came wrapped in controversy. This was not a vindication of his earlier conduct, but it was an acknowledgement that war required a diversity of leadership styles. The institution Bradley was shaping was strong, but it was not monolithic, and it could bend when necessity demanded. The climax of this internal reckoning came quietly, without public declarations or dramatic reversals. It emerged in the way commanders were evaluated, in the language used to describe acceptable initiative, and in the growing understanding that discipline and aggression were not mutually exclusive. Allen's firing remained a cautionary tale, but it also became a point of comparison, a reminder of what unrestrained combat leadership looked like at its most effective and most disruptive. Officers debated it in private, weighing the costs of control against the dangers of hesitation. In these discussions, Allen's name carried weight not because he had been flawless, but because he had forced the army to confront its own boundaries. The resolution settled slowly, without ceremony. Allen remained a figure of controversy, his career A reminder that war wore some qualities while punishing others, often without clear explanation. Omar Bradley's decision remained a cornerstone of his legacy, emblematic of a command style that favored cohesion over charisma. Toga, their intersecting paths illustrated the tension inherent in any large military force at war, the need to harness fierce, immediate leadership without allowing it to fracture the system it serves. That tension did not end with World War II. But in the crucible of that conflict, it was given one of its most enduring and instructive expressions. The influence of Allen's leadership extended beyond strategy and tactic. It shaped the very ethos of soldiers who had lived under his command. Men who had endured his relentless night operations carried forward a sense of resilience and initiative, an understanding that survival often depended on judgment in moments when no orders existed. Even after his departure, his presence lingered in quiet ways. A junior officer recalling a nighttime assault, a sergeant describing how the men moved under pressure, a private remembering how Allen had walked the line among his troops when others might have remained safely behind. These human impressions were as potent as any written order, transmitting values of courage, decisiveness, and personal accountability to the next generation of leaders. Bradley, for his part, remained conscious of the subtler effects of Allen's removal. He understood that discipline alone could not produce an army capable of exploiting fleeting opportunities or responding creatively to unexpected circumstances. In briefings and operational reviews, he emphasized flexibility within established plans, implicitly alleging that the instincts Allen had championed remained vital to success. The tension between Allen's aggressive, unpredictable approach and Bradley's methodical control had created a template for effective command, one that valued initiative, but only when it enhanced cohesion rather than undermining it. In this sense, Allen's influence had been institutionalized, embedded in doctrine even without official recognition. The progression of late war campaigns revealed the practical value of this hybrid approach. Units moved with the precision of a coordinated army yet retained the ability to act decisively when confronted with enemy weaknesses. Night advances, small unit raids, and rapid exploitation of gaps in defenses became integrated into larger operations, allowing forces to maintain pressure while preserving logistical and operational integrity. Soldiers experienced a rhythm that blended calculated patience with aggressive execution, a rhythm that owed its existence as much to Allen's influence as to Bradley's structural oversight. The army was learning, through practice and reflection, to harness energy and initiative without sacrificing order. The climax of this development was visible in operations such as the final push into Germany, where combined arms coordination and rapid exploitation of enemy vulnerabilities defined success. Leaders at all levels applied lessons derived from Allen's example, moving aggressively where opportunity presented itself, striking before the enemy could regroup while operating within a disciplined, well-supplied framework. Soldiers recognized the benefits of this balance. They felt the empowerment of initiative alongside the reassurance of support and planning. In these campaigns, the seemingly incompatible traits of audacity and control converged to produce results neither philosophy could achieve alone. The resolution of this long arc was both pragmatic and enduring. Terry Allen's career, marked by brilliance and controversy, left an invisible yet palpable imprint on the Army's culture and tactics. Bradley's decisions, motivated by institutional necessity and personal conviction, ensured that the Army could sustain operations at scale while accommodating controlled initiative. Their intersecting legacies shaped not only the conduct of battles but also the professional development of officers, the expectations of soldiers, and the broader character of the American Army. In the quiet calculus of experience, the story of Allen's removal illustrated a fundamental truth of leadership in World War II, that effective command required both discipline and daring, and that the lessons of one commander's relentless drive could ultimately strengthen the very system that once constrained it.